So, first a fair warning, this video might give you a headache. But as you know, I'm reading my TBR in publication order, and I'm finally getting pretty close to the 1990s. And honestly, this might be one of the most exciting parts of my entire TBR. The 90s were a huge decade for both fantasy and science fiction. And there are a lot of famous books and series that I've either never read or have only barely started. So today I want to go through the book series from the 90s that I'm looking forward to the most. And I'm not counting rereads for this video, so series like Song of Ice and Fire and Harry Potter won't be included, even though I will reread both of them. And I'm only looking at books that will actually be new reads for me. And I'm going to split this into fantasy and science fiction, because there are quite a few books I want to talk about. So yeah, let's start with fantasy. And the first one is probably the most obvious choice, The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. Now The Wheel of Time is one of the biggest fantasy series ever written. And it's also one of those series that I've somehow managed to avoid for a very long time. I believe there are 11 main books written by Robert Jordan, and the 3 final books were completed by Brandon Sanderson after Jordan passed away, making 14 main books in total, plus a prequel. So this isn't exactly a small commitment. And that's one of the things that makes me both excited and slightly nervous about it. I've heard so many different opinions about the series over the years. And some people consider it one of the greatest fantasy series ever written, while other people complain about the pacing, the enormous cast of characters, and just how much time Jordan spends describing basically everything. But that's actually part of why I'm interested in it. And at this point, I feel like I've read enough fantasy that I want to see what some of these massive series actually are, rather than just hearing about them. And The Wheel of Time is probably one of the biggest gaps in my reading history. And I'm especially interested in seeing how the series develops over so many books. And The Eye of the World is also one of those books that has become almost legendary within fantasy. It's been around for decades and has influenced a lot of modern fantasy, and so many fantasy readers have either grown up with this series or just have very strong opinions about it. And so I'm just curious to finally find out where I stand on it. And next up is The Sword of Destiny by Andrzej Sapkowski. And I've actually already read the first book in the series, The Last Wish. This is the first Witcher book, but I've never continued with the series. So technically this isn't completely new territory for me. And my plan is to actually reread The Last Wish before continuing, because it's been a while since I read it. And I want to go through the Witcher books properly this time. And then I'll move on to Sword of Destiny. And what interests me about The Witcher is that the early books are quite different from what you might expect from a giant fantasy series. The Last Wish is largely made up of short stories, and they introduce Geralt, the world, and a lot of the ideas that eventually become important to the larger story. And I've also seen the Witcher universe grow into this huge franchise through games and a television series. But I've never actually read very far into Sapkowski's original books. So I'm curious to see what the series is actually like beyond the first book. And because I'm reading everything in publication order, I think this is also a nice opportunity to go back to the beginning and experience the series as it originally developed. And then we have The Curse of the Mistwraith by Jenny Wirtz. And I think this one is interesting because I'm already familiar with Jenny Wirtz through the Empire trilogy, which she wrote together with Raymond E. Feist. And I really enjoyed the first book, Daughter of the Empire, earlier this year. So naturally I'm curious about what Wirtz is like when she's writing her own series. And The Curse of the Mistwraith is the first book in the Wars of Light and Shadow. And this is one of those other large fantasy series. So apparently I'm approaching the 90s by adding several enormous commitments to my reading schedule. But what makes this one stand out is that I already have some experience with Wirtz's writing. And I think the Daughter of the Empire already gave me a pretty good impression of what she can do. But that was, like I said, a collaboration with Feist. And this series is entirely her own creation, so I'm interested in seeing how different it feels. And I also like the fact that this is a series I don't hear discussed nearly as much as some of the bigger series like The Wheel of Time. And sometimes those lesser known series are just the ones I'm most curious about. And next up we have Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. And this is another major fantasy series that I've somehow never read. Assassin's Apprentice is the first book in the Farseer trilogy, which eventually forms part of the much larger realm of the Eldlings universe. And Robin Hobb has a reputation for writing very character-driven fantasy. That's probably the main thing I'm looking forward to here. A lot of the fantasy I've been reading recently has been very focused on big plots, large worlds, politics, wars, or just huge events. So I'm curious to see what Hobb does when the characters themselves are the main attraction. And Fitz, the main character, is also one of those characters that I've heard people talk about for years. Usually when Robin Hobb comes up, someone has a very strong opinion about Fitz. So I'm interested to finally meet him myself. And once again, this is the beginning of a much larger universe. And I like getting into the series at the beginning because I get to watch the world grow over time. So Assassin's Apprentice is definitely one of the books I'm most curious about from the 90s. And finally, for fantasy, we have Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson. And this one might be the most intimidating book on the list. Gardens of the Moon was published in 1999 and starts the Malazan Book of the Fallen, which is one of those fantasy series that has a reputation for being absolutely massive and incredibly complicated. And I've heard Malazan described as difficult, confusing, rewarding, overwhelming, brilliant, and basically every other possible adjective. And it honestly makes me just more interested in it. And this series doesn't seem particularly interested in holding the reader's hand. There are these huge numbers of characters, enormous amounts of history, different cultures, gods, magic systems, and all sorts of things all happening at the same time. And apparently you just have to figure it out as you go. And that's a little intimidating, but it's also the kind of reading experience I'm curious about. And I've read quite a lot of fantasy by this point, so I'm interested in seeing whether Malazan really is as difficult as people claim. And because it starts right at the end of the 1990s, it's almost a perfect book to represent the transition into the kind of massive complex fantasy that became so popular in the decades that followed. So yeah, those are my 5 big fantasy picks. But the science fiction books might actually be even more interesting. Because the 1990s were really a important decade for science fiction, especially when it comes to space opera. And that's something I'm particularly excited about because space opera is probably one of my favorite areas of science fiction. And there are several big series from the 90s that I haven't read yet, and some of them are actually enormous. But yeah, first up is A Fire Upon the Deep by Vernor Vinge. And this is part of the Zones of Thought universe. And the basic idea behind the series is that intelligence works differently depending on where you are in the universe. The galaxy is divided into different zones, and as you move through them, the capabilities of intelligence and technology change. And I find that concept really interesting, but also a bit weird. And one of the things I enjoy about older science fiction is that authors are sometimes willing to take one strange idea and build an entire universe around it. And Vinge seems to do exactly that here. And it's also a proper space opera, so I'm expecting a big scale, lots of different civilizations, advanced technology, and some pretty ambitious ideas. And it's also one of those books where I don't really want to know too much about the plot before going in. The concept itself is enough to get me interested. And then we have Raft by Stephen Baxter. And this is the first book in the Xili sequence. And if you think the Wheel of Time is ambitious, the Xili sequence takes things to a completely different level. The series spans enormous periods of time and deals with humanity and other civilizations on a scale that can reach billions of years. And it's exactly the kind of ridiculous science fiction scale that I enjoy. And Raft itself is the first book, so it's where I'll be starting. I've actually already read a little Stephen Baxter before, but not enough to really have a strong opinion about him. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he does with his enormous universe. And I'm always interested in science fiction that tries to move beyond the usual human timescale. Instead of just asking what humanity will look like in 100 or 500 years, Baxter is playing with ideas that involve civilizations and events separated by millions or even billions of years. And that's hard to even imagine. And that's exactly why I want to read it. Okay, and next up is The Ancients of God by Jack McDougall. And this is probably the least famous book on my list, and that's actually one of the reasons I picked it. It's a space opera where humanity discovers an alien artifact out in space. And that alone sounds like something I'd enjoy. But the reason I became interested in it in the first place is because this particular book is because I've heard this book compared to Mass Effect. And if you watched any of my videos before, you probably know that's enough to get my attention. And I love the idea of humanity exploring space and discovering evidence that we're not alone. And I'm especially interested when the aliens aren't simply another civilization that we can communicate with immediately, but instead they leave behind mysterious artifacts that humanity has to try to understand. I'm hoping this one gives me that classic sense of exploration and discovery. And it's also nice to have something on this list that isn't one of the giant famous science fiction series that everyone already talks about. And then we have The Reality Dysfunction by Peter F. Hamilton. And Hamilton is probably better known today for the Commonwealth saga, especially Pandora's Star, but the Reality Dysfunction came earlier, and it actually starts the Night's Dawn trilogy. And this is yet another massive space opera. And one thing Hamilton is famous for is writing absolutely enormous books. We're talking books that can easily reach 1,000 pages or even more. And apparently he doesn't just write science fiction like science fiction, he writes it almost like fantasy. You get huge casts of characters, multiple storylines, massive worlds, and sometimes incredibly complicated plots. And that's something I'm definitely curious about. And I believe the Night's Dawn trilogy also has some horror elements mixed into the science fiction. And the combination sounds particularly interesting. Space opera combined with horror is not something I come across all that often. So I'm really curious to see how Hamilton handles it. And considering how popular Pandora's Star is, I'm also interested in seeing what his earlier writing was like. And if I end up enjoying this trilogy, there's a pretty good chance I'll eventually want to get to the Commonwealth saga as well. And finally, we have the Engineer Reconditioned by Neil Asher. This is part of the Polity universe. And this one is a little different because the first book is actually a collection of short stories. And these stories helped establish the universe, which eventually became a massive space opera setting. And I've always liked the idea of reading a science fiction universe that grows over time. You start with a few short stories and eventually end up with this huge interconnected setting. And Neil Asher's universe is apparently exactly that kind of thing. So I'm interested to see what those early stories are like. And it also gives me another opportunity to explore a science fiction author I've never really read before. And at this point, that's probably the biggest reason I'm excited about getting closer to the 90s. It's not just that these books are famous, it's that I'm getting to a period where there are so many authors and series that I've heard about for years, but have never actually experienced. So those are the books and series from the 90s that I'm looking forward to the most. And looking at this list, I think the 90s might be one of the most dangerous decades in my entire TBR. I've got The Wheel of Time, Malazan, Realm of the Elvelings, Wars of Light and Shadow, the Xeelee sequence, and the Polity universe. And those aren't exactly short commitments. But I think that's also what makes it exciting. And as I'm reading my TBR through in publication order, I'm slowly moving through the history of science fiction and fantasy. And I've already read a lot of books from the 50s until the 80s, and now I'm finally getting close to the 90s. And when I look at what was published during that decade, there's a huge number of books that I generally want to read. And the 90s also feel like an important transition period. Fantasy was producing those enormous epic series, while science fiction was really embracing massive space opera and increasingly ambitious ideas about technology, civilization, and the future overall. So I'm very curious to see what I think of these books when I finally get there. And because I'm reading in publication order, I don't have to choose which one I read first, based on what I'm most excited about. I'll just get there eventually, which, considering how many books are between me and the 90s, might take a while. But that's the fun of having a giant TBR. There were always more books waiting for you. And I'm just approaching them one book at a time. Anyway, like I said, I hope you don't have a headache. Yeah, that's all I have for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next one.